So we'll take up that question which Sai has put. Uh, I think I understand the question like this, that when we observe another human being without the observer, then what happens? Is it right, Sai? This means we have talked about observing a reaction without the observer. We have talked about observing the external object like tree or hills without the observer. But then what happens when we look at another human being without the observer? Right. So this is quite an interesting question because it also relates with the emptying of the consciousness of all its content. Because observer is made up of the content of consciousness. Because observer is all the knowledge, experience, all the images and everything that has been gathered or collected. And then that observer is trying to observe. So it is going to observe according to its background, according to its program. And therefore, it will be able to see only according to that conditioning, according to that program. So which means that it is not actually seeing what it is, but it is seeing what it appears to be through all the filters of that observer. Because all this conditioning, they act like filters. So whatever you see through those filters, that will appear as it appears through those corresponding filters. So naturally, you are not able to see things as they are. Now, when we say observing without the observer, which means that no filter, no background, which means that there is a direct seeing, direct observation of another person, right? And if another person is also similarly observing without the observer, right, then something very interesting happens, because then both the persons are at the same level, at the same time, with the same intensity. And once that condition happens, right, then Krishnaji says that then that condition itself is love. That state itself is the state of compassion. So which means that there is compassion or love between those two human beings because they are at the same level, at the same time, with the same intensity. And then the communication doesn't need words. Then that opens the door for non-verbal communication. So you don't need actually to communicate anything verbally. Whatever the other person wants to convey is immediately sensed by the other person. So it is almost like a telepathic communication. No need to even say things, because they are immediately understood. So it's a very interesting phenomenon. I mean, if you can have that kind of relationship with another human being, I think there can be nothing more thrilling, more exciting than that kind of thing. It's very fantastic. But then the other case is when one human being is observing without the observer, while the other human being is still with the observer. That means he is not able to observe without the observer. So that is the condition between us and Krishnaji. Krishnaji is observing us without the observer, but we are not able to observe Krishnaji without the observer because we haven't yet emptied the content of our consciousness. And therefore, then what is our relationship to Krishnaji? So our relationship will be through all those filters of the observer. So we may have very high regards for Krishnaji, we may consider him as a world teacher, and so we may have a relationship through that image of Krishnaji. And then our behavior will be according to that. While Krishnaji can relate with us and he is able to observe us, he is able to observe everything that is happening within us, right? And he is also able to observe that whatever he is trying to convey verbally, right? All that communication is being interpreted by the intellectual apparatus of the observer, and then whatever conclusion it comes to, that it is taking as what Krishnaji is trying to convey. So Krishnaji can see it very clearly, and therefore he is trying to put whatever he wants to communicate in many different ways so as to bypass this intellectual apparatus and directly reach that human being, right? But then the human beings are so stubborn, the intellectual apparatus will continue to interfere, will continue to do all its work or whatever it is and defeat the whole purpose. And then although Krishnaji is able to communicate non-verbally, that non-verbal communication is just passing by without making any impact on the observed, because observed is not in a position to grasp or to receive that non-verbal communication because it is still caught up with his own program, with his own contents. And so we are completely missing that non-verbal communication. And whatever we are grasping, we are simply intellectually interpreting it and coming to our own conclusions and then saying that that is what Krishnaji is conveying. And then he has to again put the matter in a different way to pull us out of the clasp of that conclusion, right? And put it in a different way. But again, we repeat the same thing. Even if it is put in a different way, we again capture it, again intellectualize it, and again interpret it, and again arrive at some conclusion. So our movement is from one conclusion to another conclusion. But we are never able to see without the intellectual activity. So that is why then he has to explain about what is listening, what is observing, and then he is asking us whether we can listen like that, whether we can observe like that, so on. But then when there is this sense of love or sense of affection, then this communication, non-verbal communication happens on its own. You don't have to do anything about it. It just happens. So our situation is like whatever happens between Krishnaji and us, that is what is our position actually. And unless we are able to come out of that, we may not be able to actually grasp what he is trying to say. Now, it is possible to make the intellectual apparatus defunct, that means non-operational temporarily, right? But that is actually not allowed, that is not a desirable way, because that is what happens in the hypnotized state. That means we have our intellectual apparatus with its intellectual capacity and also what is called as common sense, because whatever is presented to us, we try to grasp it using our common sense, and anything which doesn't go with the common sense, we then start doubting it. Because and that is a good thing, because that is a kind of protective mechanism which decides what can go in the brain and what cannot go in the brain. So anything which doesn't go with common sense is not easily accepted by the person, and so he will question it, he will doubt it, and so on. Only when he will completely understand it, then he may accept it. So that is a kind of protective mechanism. But then in hypnotism, what they do, they make that intellectual apparatus, that common sense, non-functional. So they put the person to sleep. That means they are actually putting that apparatus, that common sense, to sleep. Once that is non-functional, then anything can get into the brain of the hypnotized person. That means you can say anything and that will be simply accepted. That will be simply believed, without questioning, without doubting, without anything. And then once that is accepted, the hypnotized person's response will be also according to that acceptance. That means, for example, you hypnotize a person and the weather is very hot, you are perspiring, right? And you tell that hypnotized person that the weather is very cold and it is snowing outside, and therefore he will start shivering. That hypnotized person will start shivering because of cold, and while the hypnotizing or hypnotizer is actually perspiring. So anything will be simply accepted without questioning, without doubting. So he can put any kind of illusion in the mind of that person, and that illusion will be also accepted immediately as a reality. So that kind of state is not acceptable. In enquiry, the hypnotizing of a person or making this common sense capability non-functional is not allowed. In enquiry, it has no place. So many times, Krishnaji also reminds his audience that don't get hypnotized by the speaker. That means, because some people may accept Krishnaji as a world teacher, they may accept him as a realized, liberated soul, and therefore they may simply accept whatever he says without questioning, without understanding. So which means that they are not using their common sense. They simply accept whatever he is saying as true and then try to behave or try to live according to that. So there is a very interesting anecdote about it. What happens when the common sense is not used, when you simply accept what the other person says? So Krishnaji usually doesn't tell us what to do and what not to do, but he encourages us to find out by ourselves what should we do and what we should not do by understanding the situation. So he used to conduct the self-preparation groups. So this was in 30s, 20 and 30s. And once what he did, he prepared a list of 20 do's and don'ts about food. That means what to eat, what not to eat, when not to eat, how much to eat, and all these things. So 20 clear-cut instructions. And then he circulated it among those participants. And people were very excited because Krishnaji, who never told anything in terms of do's and don'ts, for the first time giving a list of these 20 do's and don'ts. And so they were very much thrilled. And then everybody started following those 20 suggestions scrupulously. following exactly what is said in that. And then after some time, the followers found that it was not suiting them. They started having trouble with their stomach. And so then they complained to Krishnaji, saying that, sir, you have suggested this, but we find that all this is doesn't seem to be correct, because we are suffering, we are also getting troubled. So he said that you followed the first 19 instructions correctly or scrupulously, but you completely ignored the last instruction. That was the 20th. And the last instruction was, use your common sense. So use your common sense was completely ignored by people, and they simply tried to follow whatever he had said in the first 19. So common sense is very important, in the sense that it is the intellectual capacity of finding out the truthfulness of whatever is presented to oneself, to checking the facts, to verifying, and so on. So that mechanism is very important, because that is what will save you from getting into an illusion. So when Krishnaji is speaking, he is all the time reminding us that don't get hypnotized by the speaker, don't simply accept the speaker, whatever he says, on the basis of what you think about him. That means don't accept the authority of the speaker, or don't make an authority out of him, but listen to what he is saying and then use your common sense to find out what exactly he is trying to convey. And then when you understand the truth of whatever he is saying, then that will impact your day-to-day life. But what we do usually is we listen to him, make an intellectual conclusion about it, and then try to live according to that conclusion. So, which is completely contrary to what he is asking us to do. Because then we are not only creating authority out of him, but we are also creating a pattern which we try to fit ourselves into. And then the whole struggle begins, because we are unable to fit ourselves exactly into that pattern. And we don't want to also change the pattern because the world teacher has said it. And so we are in a very precarious position. We are in great conflict. So, which is very contrary to what he is saying. So we have to use our common sense, we have to understand, we have to doubt whatever he is saying, and we have to test the truth of it in our daily life, and then it will have its own impact. We don't have to actually try to do anything deliberately. If it is understood, that understanding itself will change the things, will have its own impact, and we don't have to do anything according to that understanding. Because according to understanding, doing something is the way of the thinker. So that is how the things are. Then we also talk about the various levels of consciousness, that is conscious, subconscious, unconscious. Now unconscious we don't have to talk much, because unconscious means the non-functioning of the thinking activity of the brain. That means the brain is temporarily incapacitated, so that it cannot think, it cannot be active in the way of thinking. So this unconscious state may be due to accident, or due to some shock, or if it is for medical purpose, then it is due to anesthesia and so on. So we don't have to, there is nothing much to discuss about unconscious. But then there is what is called as subconscious. And every hypnotist and everybody, they talk the psychiatrist, they talk endlessly about this subconscious. Now Krishnaji says that there is no such division in consciousness where you call one part as the conscious and the other part as the subconscious. There is no such division. In fact, one interesting anecdote is in this series of dialogues between Krishnaji, David Bohm and David Schoenberg. Now David Schoenberg was a practicing psychiatrist in New York. So he was the person who will endlessly talk about the conscious, subconscious layers of consciousness and all these things. And during that series of dialogues, while exploring and explaining something, he happened to say that there is no such division as subconscious and conscious. And Krishnaji's response was very interesting. Krishnaji showed all the surprise on his face and he told him, you Schoenberg, you all the time talking about subconscious and conscious, and now you are saying that there is no such thing as subconscious. There is only one consciousness. So David Bowie, it was actually, he actually pulled his leg by saying that. But then David Schoenberg, he looked at him and he said, yes, but there is no such division. And then Krishnaji said, yes, I completely agree with that. So maybe this division is superficially created in order to understand certain phenomena, in order to make the understanding simpler of certain happenings. But actually there may not be such division at all. So it is just one consciousness, right? Because if you accept the subconscious and all these things, then it can lead to a lot of difficulties, particularly when we talk about the consciousness being one consciousness and not separate units of consciousness belonging to each human being. So then there will be collective subconscious and then collective conscious and all those kinds of things. So actually it is not so. What we can say is that the content of consciousness, now all that content may not be visibly active. Only certain content may be visibly active when we are functioning in our day-to-day life. So usually whatever content is visibly active, we can say is that yes, it is in the conscious state. And the content which is not visibly active, right? I am saying visibly active, that means it can be active, but it is not visible that it is active. So that we may be terming as subconscious, but it is only a matter of convenience to understand, because if the intellect tries to understand things in terms of analysis, and analysis means breaking something into various parts, understanding each part, and then putting all those parts together to understand the whole. So that is what the analytical approach. That means you want to understand certain machine, right? So you separate that machine into its parts, understand the function of each part, and then put all those parts together and then understand how the machine functions and what are its limitations and what are its capabilities and so on. So that is the analytical approach. Now with the same approach, when we try to understand our consciousness, then naturally we will divide it into several parts. So here the two parts, the subconscious and the conscious, and then try to understand the function of each part, the working of each part, and then try to put them together to understand the whole consciousness. So that is the analytical approach. But is there actually such a division? Right. So there is actually no such division. It is just one consciousness. It is just one whole. It is not a combination of several parts. So that is one aspect. Then other thing I wanted to uh, explore was this state of sleep and dreaming. In fact, in the material given to you, there is one chapter on dream. Uh, so Krishnaji's approach is like this. He says that when we are living our daily life, and we are living that daily life inattentively, that means we are not attentive all the time. So when we live our daily life inattentively, we seem to create lot of disorder. We seem to create lot of psychological disorder in ourselves, within us. And our brain, it cannot function properly in the state of disorder. The brain needs complete order in order to function properly, right? But we are all the time creating disorder because of our inattention. And as long as we are creating disorder, brain cannot do much to establish order. So the brain is helpless during our waking hours. But when we go to sleep, then this activity of creating disorder at least is temporarily paused. Then the brain has its opportunity to establish order. So then, although we are asleep, the brain is not asleep. The brain is functioning and it is trying to establish some kind of order within us. And in that activity of trying to establish order, many times we dream. So dreams are nothing but the manifestation of that activity of the brain of establishing order in itself. Now, if the brain is able to establish order completely, then when we wake up, we feel very fresh. We say that I had very good sleep and I rested well. And if the brain is not able to establish order completely, then when we wake up, we are not that fresh. We say, well, I slept, but I'm not feeling that fresh. Maybe I didn't have good sleep. And sometimes if the brain is not able to establish any order, that means whatever disorder was there, the same disorder continued even after waking up. Then which means that you had such a disturbed sleep. So many times you feel that you didn't sleep at all. You had a sleepless night because the activity of the brain during waking hours was same as the activity of the brain during sleeping hours. So that means there wasn't any difference between your wakeful state and sleeping state. And therefore, when you wake up actually next day morning, you feel that you didn't sleep at all. You had a sleepless night and you are also able to see what kind of thoughts were going on in your brain during that time and so on. So to have a good sleep means the brain is able to establish order in itself and therefore you are fresh next day. But the other interesting thing which Krishnaji talked about was, suppose if you live your daily life attentively, that means you are not creating any disorder in yourself, right? So whatever you are going through it attentively and therefore not leaving any residue behind. So therefore no disorder is created. So when such a person goes to sleep, then there is no work for the brain. He doesn't have to work to establish order, because order is already there. So in such a condition, then the brain opens up to other areas, the other dimensions of existence, and where it can receive communications from a totally different dimension. So which means that a completely different faculty of the brain opens up during sleep. And so a person may have some significant dreams, in the sense that dreams showing some insights, or dreams showing some future happenings, and so on. So such kind of significant dreams a person can have during that state. So which means that the brain then is active in a completely different dimension, because it doesn't have to be bothered about establishing order. So for a person living his daily life inattentively, during the sleep, the brain has to keep on working to clear all the mess we have generated during our waking hours. So most of the time and energy of the brain goes in that, so that next day at least the brain is able to function properly during waking hours. But if we don't make a mess, and if we live our daily life attentively, then the brain, which is free during the sleep, is then capable of receiving communications from a completely different dimension. So that is what Krishnaji has talked about the sleep, the significance of sleep and dreams. Then we were also yesterday talking about the totality of human consciousness. Now some people, they understand this as the totality of human consciousness as a super consciousness. But there is nothing super about it, because the content of the totality of human consciousness is the same as the content of the individual human consciousness. Because whatever kind of life each individual is living psychologically and generating those psychological contents, that content itself is forming what is called as the totality of human consciousness. So the totality of human consciousness qualitatively is no different from the individual consciousness, the so-called individual consciousness. So it has the same content as fear, then violence, and then jealousy and attachment and desires and all those things, the same content. So qualitatively it is not superior at all, it is the same. So to calling it a superior consciousness or super consciousness is incorrect. There is nothing super about it. But the person who has emptied his consciousness, which means that he has stepped out of this whole stream of content of consciousness. Krishnaji calls it as a stream, because this content is not a stationary fixed thing. It is all the time flowing, all the time moving. So this flow of content of consciousness he is referring to as a stream, and he calls it as a stream of sorrow, because this whole movement of the content of consciousness is finally leading to a state of sorrow. And so if a person is able to step out of this stream of sorrow, right, then what will be his relationship with this stream? Because he is no longer part of the stream. So does that mean that he has no relationship with the stream? And then what happens? Uh, so the person who has emptied his consciousness of all its content, so there is no content in it, right? So any content from the totality of human consciousness, any content from that, if it passes through this empty consciousness, right, then it just passes through it. I mean, nothing happens. And as it passes through, it is observed. And through that observation, the source of that content is traceable. And once the source is traced, then you are able to know that person. So, for example, if a thought of depression passes through this empty consciousness, then that thought is observed. Then it is possible to trace the source of that thought. And if the source happens to be a certain person, then this empty consciousness immediately able to see that that person is feeling depressed. And then uh, if at all there is any action with respect to that, then that action can happen. So in such a case, maybe that fellow may call him and ask him, oh, why are you feeling depressed, and so on. And this fellow may be surprised that how do you know that I am feeling depressed? So such kinds of things, they happen. But if the consciousness is not empty and it still has some content, right, then any such thought passing through that consciousness, that thought, if it finds anything similar to itself in that content, then that thought will immediately get attached to that content. And that content will be stimulated, and then that person will start thinking according to that content. And when he starts thinking according to that content, he is not at all aware that it is due to the external influence that he is thinking like that. He will feel that that is what he is thinking, that is his thought. And then he will act or behave according to that. So which means that as long as there is a content in consciousness, then that person is influentiable. That means that person is subject to influence. He can easily get influence. But if there is no content, then these passing thoughts, they have nothing to attach to. So they simply enter that emptiness and they come out of that emptiness. So Krishna ji has described it as a cloud passing through the sky. The cloud doesn't get stuck to the sky, it just comes and goes. The sky is unaffected. So this empty consciousness is unaffected by any thoughts passing through it. So the relationship of a person who has stepped out of the stream with the people who are still in the stream is the relationship of compassion. And what will be the action of that compassion, we don't know. The thought cannot predict the action of compassion. And therefore, many times the action may seem illogical, action may seem quite contrary to what we understand by compassion. And yet, because we don't know what compassion is, we are likely to be mistaken. So, that was another aspect which I wanted to point out regarding this consciousness. Yeah, I think now you can ask questions and we'll take it up further according to those questions.
Sir, yesterday I talked about the naming the thing.
Yeah.
If we put the statement that observation without naming, it means we are putting a condition, precondition for observation.
Yeah.
Which also means that we are inventing a system. Whenever we are asking with a condition to observe, it leads to some system. Should observe without naming. So is naming that important? Because it is a condition again. So whenever there is a condition, it becomes a system.
Yeah.
So I think some trap there.
Yeah, the trap is like this. If you say that observation should be without naming, then observation then what?
No, observation, it should be pure observation. Naming or no naming, it doesn't matter.
No, but then you have to define what you mean by pure observation.
Yeah, it should be like that. Because naming or no naming, whenever we put a condition, it becomes a system. And
No, but that is what I am saying. Once you put a condition, which means that it is a conclusion.
Yeah,
right. And then according to that conclusion, we want the things to happen. If it is observation, then observation should be according to that condition and so on. But that is not the approach. That is the approach of the thinker. The thinker will say like that, right? But while in inquiry, we are merely observing. And in that observation, we find that the naming is taking place. So we are just questioning the naming. That is that naming. So what is happening when the naming is taking place? So there is further observation of that. So no conditions are put in inquiry or in observation. Whatever that is happening, that is being observed. Right? But in communicating, what we are communicating is that when the real observation happens, that doesn't necessitate naming. Naming is not necessary. But on the contrary, we are also observing when naming happens, then what actually is happening and whether it is preventing the observation. So all that is being seen without putting any condition, without saying should or should not.
that's the point. Because generally, while we are talking or reading even Krishnamurti videos, observation without naming, so it hits a certain condition.
Yeah, it creates that kind of sense because we are reading it through our intellectual apparatus, and the intellectual apparatus has its own interpretation, its own understanding, and so on. So it will interpret as usual. That means it will interpret it in terms of conclusion and conditions, and then try to impose those conditions on that observation. So then that observation becomes the intellectual activity, and so no longer the actual observation. So actual observation is just seeing, and when you are seeing everything that is happening. So if a naming is taking place, you are seeing that naming process also, and after naming, if a thought comes saying that there should not be any naming, then that is also being seen. So the observation means only observing, nothing else. And all the activity of the thinker, if it is happening during that observation, then even that activity of the thinker is also being observed without objecting to any of those things, neither accepting nor justifying nor resisting, nothing. as things happen, they are seen.
Right. That
Yeah,
is what
that,
I'm
that,
saying.
that is actually the approach. Yeah.
Because many times I find that maybe it hits
Yeah,
somewhere.
yeah.
We get that.
No, when we try to put it in words and try to understand it intellectually, then this is what happens. I mean, many times we end up in do's and don'ts, and then we try to follow those do's and don'ts. So,
Because
and
it
then
hits.
we
It
land in
hits.
difficulty.
That's why.
Yeah,
Sir, I have a question.
yeah.
Uh, so we are talking about then two consciousness. Where there is a pool of consciousness and there is an individual consciousness also. Because emptying the individual consciousness, it means there are two states of consciousness.
No, 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 no. I think emptying the individual
And then,
consciousness is may not be a right term. It may not be a right term. In fact, probably stepping out of the stream of consciousness may be a right term, because the person is not holding on to any content. So that empty consciousness, we don't call it as consciousness at all. Krishnaji would say that we don't even call it as consciousness. It is altogether a different state. So we don't have to confuse between the two. That means there is only the consciousness which is made up of its content, and without content there is no consciousness. That means there is something else. Now, what is that something else? That something else, maybe we just call it as just the emptiness. We don't have to call it as empty consciousness. We can just call it as emptiness. So out of that
so there is
emptiness, yeah,
so there is only one consciousness, that is the stream of consciousness,
yeah, which is made up of its content.
which is made of its content,
Yeah,
and we contribute in the stream.
yes.
We may contribute in the stream,
Not we may, we are all the time contributing to the stream because we have lots of
contributing, and
content
we are taking.
which we are also gathering and considering it as our personal content, and then strengthening it and again contributing it to that stream.
Is it total order, sir? Total order of the brain cells? Is it total order of the brain cells?
I think maybe we cannot put the question in that sense. What we can say is that the person who has stepped out of the stream, right, then whatever that emptiness will have its own effect on the brain cells. That means the brain cells will get aligned according to that, and therefore they become capable of uh, connecting to that emptiness. That means then the emptiness will be able to function through such a brain. Because a brain which is cluttered up, a brain which is in disorder, the brain which is in confusion, now through such a brain the emptiness cannot function. So when the emptiness is there, then the brain gets aligned to that emptiness, because when the emptiness tries to function through such a brain, it affects the brain and the brain starts getting aligning with that. And when there is a complete alignment, then the emptiness is able to function without any obstruction through such a brain. Otherwise, many times the obstruction has to be overcome. And if the brain is unable to align itself to that emptiness, then there will be aberrations in the behavior of such a person. Sometimes he may appear as very genius, while sometimes he will appear as worse than the ordinary person. So, in fact, you may see that some of the geniuses, they may be genius in their particular field, but then as far as their daily life is concerned, they are completely chaotic, total disorder. But sometimes having flashes of geniusness. So even such cases we are able to say lots of artists, the painters, if we uh, examine their personal life, they were very chaotic, although they were excellent in their art.
Sir,
Rajashekhar,
Buddhism has,
ask, yeah.
yeah. So we have been discussing about consciousness, and that has reminded me of one particular sutra in the Pali Buddhism, and in which Buddha refers to consciousness as a magician's trick. And I was also kind of looking it up online some time ago, and there is also a lot of scholarly literature in it, how it is illusion of consciousness or magic of consciousness, as Daniel Dennett and a couple of other people refer to it as. So has Krishnamurti, has Kate, did he throw any light on that?
No, I didn't understand that term. You said some trick. What trick?
So Buddha said, Buddha, there is a concept called as Pancha Upadana Khanda, and there are 5 khandas, our feeling, and then our volition, and our form and consciousness. So there are 5 such elements in Buddhism which are referred to as khandhas, and consciousness is one of them. And Buddha says how each of these are not substantial and hence not worthy of getting attached to. It doesn't make sense, is what the point that he makes. And when he is talking about the insubstantiality of consciousness, he gives the analogy of how it is like a magician's trick, and how there is no substance in a trick, and hence it is only to
Meditation
point to.
trick. You said meditation trick or which trick?
No. Magician's trick.
Oh, magician's trick. Okay.
Yeah,
Magicians.
it's almost like there is a sleight of hand. I think Bohm uses that phrase somewhere, that it is a sleight of hand, basically. So has Krishnamurti talked anything about how consciousness is kind of an illusion or something
Yes.
like a,
Krishnaji has
yeah.
talked about the tremendous capacity of thought to create illusions, right?
Okay,
So
yeah.
now example can be given. Okay, let us take some example to explain this. See, there is an external object. From that external object, the brain receives the input,
Yeah.
right? That input is in the form of sensation. And that sensation is processed by the brain and recognized, and then that external object is perceived, right? Which means that there is a one-to-one correspondence between the external object and the sensation that is generated in the brain, right?
Yeah.
So which means that whenever there is a sensation in the brain, then the brain assumes that there must be the corresponding object outside, right? Because of that one-to-one correspondence already established. So the object creating sensation and therefore the object being perceived, or the sensation indicating the existence of object and therefore brain saying that yes, that object exists. Now in this situation, as long as there is one-to-one correspondence and it is still valid, then there is no problem. Then it is all factual. But brain through its own activity can end up with certain kind of sensation, and because of that sensation may end up in assuming that since this sensation is there, therefore that corresponding object also is there outside. But brain fails to see that that sensation is not due to input from the outside object, but that sensation is due to its own activity and therefore is not related with the external object. So if the brain doesn't see that, then the brain has created an illusion, because it has the sensation, and on the basis of that sensation it is assuming that therefore the corresponding object must be there. And actually the object is not there. But the brain behaves as if it is there, right? And so many times we have such experiences, we have hallucinations, we have mistaken identities and so on. So that only indicates the capacity of the thought to create all kinds of illusions, right? So factually, we may have certain content in our consciousness, right? But the thought may think differently, right? So actually the content indicates that I am a dishonest person. But the thinker says, no, I am a very honest person. So thinker saying I am an honest person in spite of the dishonest content is a kind of illusion. So the thinker is capable of generating enormous number of illusions. I think in fact most of the time we are living in illusions because we have lots of images about ourselves, we have lots of images about others, and as long as we have those images, then we are actually in a state of illusion because the fact may be different from those images. So that is why Krishnaji says that as long as the thought functions in complete correspondence with the physical, then there is no illusion, because then all the senses are operating properly. They are receiving inputs, the inputs are being processed, and the existence of the object, external object being confirmed. So if thought functions in that way, then there is no question of illusion. But when thought functions in a psychological realm, that means it functions inside without any reference to the external, then there is a great possibility of all kinds of illusions arising. And because of this inward functioning of the thought, right, the meditation by the thinker becomes meaningless. Because in meditation, the thinker is trying to grasp or achieve something which is beyond itself. And the thinker already knows what it wants to achieve. And then according to that knowledge, it will simply project that, and he will mistaken that projection as the actual and then get caught up in that. So a person may see some blue light or this light or that light, or person may feel some sensation, or person may see some visions, and then he may say that yes, he has got it. And then he may remain in that illusion. How long, we don't know. Maybe the whole lifetime, or maybe if he is lucky enough, something else happens and which breaks his illusion and he comes out of that. So all that thing is very much observable in oneself. And therefore Krishnaji says that as long as the thinker is active, as long as the thinker is trying to meditate, then that meditation has no value, because that meditation will be another chaotic activity of the thinker, and it will only lead to illusions. So he has talked about it in this sense.
Thank you, sir. And the way you mentioned about mind not able to perceive whether the sensation is because of a actual object or a thought created object,
Yes.
that really helped me understand about what David Bohm used to say as proprioception.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was not clear for me. Now it is much
Yeah,
better. Thank you,
that's
sir. Sir, and just one more question, sir. So
yeah,
you said that during the day, if we have certain attention,
yeah,
then there is an order, else there is disorder.
yes.
So can you give it with an example on how attention and a daily happening and order, how these and disorder, how these three or four are related?
Okay.
Yeah.
So say you are doing certain work during the day.
Yeah.
And so there are two possibilities. Either you do that work attentively or you do that work casually. Now, if you do that work casually, you may not be able to complete it, or you may not be able to have a result which is acceptable to you, and so on. And so maybe although you may have completed the work, but you still have the feeling that something is missing or something is not right or something is incomplete. And that feeling will keep on bothering you, right? So that botheration is a disorder. So by not doing that work attentively, you have created disorder in the brain. But what if you do that work with full attention? That means you do it so thoroughly that it is complete and it is giving also the expected results. It is also completed within time, so the full efficiency and so on. So once the work is finished, it is finished. There is nothing lingering behind, and so no botheration. So which means that you haven't created any disorder by completion of that work. Now we are talking in terms of work, but the same thing goes with whatever we go through, whatever we experience during our wakeful hours. So through that experience, if we are not attentive, then that experience is creating disorder. And then that disorder will keep on bothering us. But if we go through that experience attentively, then whatever there is in that to experience, all that is experienced. There is nothing more to experience in it. And therefore, the experience is complete. And then it just drops. But if there is any incompleteness in the experience, then there is always a desire to repeat that experience, to go through it again. And the desire for repetition is an indication of disorder, because then it will introduce an element into our consciousness or into its content, the element of desire. And that desire will have its own pursuits in order to fulfill itself. And all that movement of desire is going to create disorder, because there is not just one desire, there may be several desires and which may be contradictory to each other. And therefore, that will lead to a lot of conflict and therefore disorder. So, living a daily life attentively means whatever that we are doing or whatever that we are experiencing or going through, we are going through it with full attention and therefore completing it then and there only. Nothing lingering, even in psychological terms.
Thank you.
So I think that is how it is related. Yes.
Thank you, sir. That was very clear. That also helped me understand on what Kay used to say about inadequate response and incompleteness.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sir,
thank you, sir.
small question. Hello.
Yeah. Gajananje?
Hello.
Yeah. Ask. We are able to
One
hear
one
you.
small one question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this question I'm a long time I'm trying to explore, and now this pertinent to this discussion. So I asking this
Yeah.
about the content. You said the contents are living thing,
Yeah.
and any living thing try to stay alive with the help of thought or whatever. The content try to make continuity and stay alive. Okay.
Yeah.
This I very much see in me.
Yeah.
What I don't understand about sorrow, the content of sorrow, it is so strange that I try to hold on to the content of sorrow. I flaunt my sorrow, invite pity, and then when people show me pity, I enjoy the self pity. And this content of, and in Marathi they call it dukha ugalne or what, and I enjoy that flaunting sorrow. And I want people to show me pity, and I enjoy that self pity also.
Yeah.
So the sense of staying alive is so horrible that I want to even hold on to the sorrows and flaunt my sorrows and invite pity and enjoy that self pity. I mean, other content I understand, pleasure and all that sweet memories, but what about sweet sorrows? It's very, very strange to me why I hold on to sorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is very strange. The self just want to thrive. It doesn't matter on what. So usually the nature of sorrow is such that anything which happens contrary to your expectation, contrary to your accepted norm or contrary to your wishes, that happening leads to a state of mind which we call as sorrow. So that state is painful because something in you, some psychological content in you has got injured because it was contradicted. So Krishnaji says that you have an image about yourself and somebody comes and puts a pin into that image and the image is just blasted off like a balloon and then you are hurt. So the sorrow is of that nature. Anything contradictory against your wishes, against what is acceptable to you and all that, against your images, whatever that you consider as yourself, anything against all that is going to generate a state of mind which is painful, which is uncomfortable, and therefore we call it as a state of sorrow. Now, what can happen is that when you are in a state of sorrow and other people are also able to see that you are really in sorrow, then they sympathize with you, then they are concerned with you, they show their concern, they interact, they show their sympathies and all these things. And all this activity again awakens that self, that ego, and which starts feeling very comfortable. So even in the state of sorrow, it is deriving comfort through the activity of others, the activity of sympathy, the activity of concern, the activity of attention he is receiving from others, and he feels elated. So, which is very strange. I remember one lady principal, she was a principal of some college and she was seriously ill, actually suffering, and she was almost on the verge of death because she was facing the possibility of complete failure of her kidneys, but somehow she survived. So in spite of all that pain and all these things, right, when she was in the hospital, the vice chancellor of the university came to see her, knowing that she was not well. And when he came and met her and went away, then this lady was so happy, so proud, that during her sickness, even the vice chancellor came and saw her. So how great she is. So she, even in the pain of that sickness, she was feeling so happy, so proud that the vice chancellor came to inquire about her. So the kind of attention she received from the person whom she considered as very important, right? And therefore her importance also got enhanced, because then the others also started talking, oh, the vice chancellor came to see her, so how much important she is, and so on. So the ego thrives on such occasions also. And if in such occasion, if it doesn't receive any attention from others, then probably then the ego really suffers. That means first of all it is suffering due to whatever has happened, and then it suffers again when it doesn't receive any attention from others to his suffering. So it is same thing that a person gets angry because of something, and he gets further angry when his anger is not noticed by others or not taken note of by others. So that is the strange behavior of this ego, the self. It always wants to thrive, doesn't matter whether it is suffering or pleasure or whatever it is. Right? So even when somebody else is suffering and the ego is helping him, right? But then the ego is always expecting thanks or something from the other. And if it doesn't receive, then it is hurt again.
May I come in, sir?
Yeah, sure. Mr. Shankar, ask. Yeah.
Yeah, I have two questions. One
Yeah.
is Is it possible to erase the total content of consciousness at a time by seeing the total conditioning wholly, or we need to do by part by part? That is my first question. Second thing is, in content of consciousness, is there anything like living and non-living? Thank you, sir.
Yeah. See, there is a big if there. That is, if you are able to see the whole content, then it is possible to end it completely. But are we really able to see the whole of the content at a glance? Right? So if we are not able to see the whole of the content in a glance, then whatever content we are able to see, so are we at least able to do something about that content? Right? So that is why this approach, that yes, whatever becomes visible to you, right, are you able to observe it without the observer, so that whatever that you are observing comes to its natural end, and then something else becomes visible, then you observe it again similarly. If you are able to observe the whole content at one glance as one action, then that action itself is enough to end that total content. But then are we really able to see like that, observe like that? Right? That is the question. So usually whatever that we are able to observe, whatever is visible to us, at least with respect to that, whether we are acting rightly. So that's all that is there in that. And then with what we were saying as the content being living entities, right? If they were dead entities or if they were inanimate entities, then you can simply wipe them out. Just like the memory of a computer, the memory of a machine. Now, the content of that memory is not a living content. That content is just inanimate. It is just a material content. So you can easily erase it, or you can easily again copy it and do whatever you want to do. You can just treat it like any other material you treat. But when we consider the content of our consciousness, the content of the human memory, now that content is not inanimate in that sense, because there is this sensation, there is this feeling, and there is the whole imagery of the thought which has been generated, and also there is this thing which we call as the consciousness. Now there is no consciousness as far as the machines are concerned, but there is this consciousness, that means the sense of existence, the sense that I am alive or being alive, right? That is very much there. Now the same sense pervades through all the content of the consciousness. So each content is also alive. It is living content. And therefore, that is why if it is living, then there is a possibility of its ending, because any living thing has to come to its natural end. So death is very much part of life. So naturally, this content also has to come to its end. And that is why, as long as we are not introducing continuity in that content through the activity of thought, then the content will live whatever its lifespan and come to its natural end. So there is no question of erasing the content. You cannot erase the content of consciousness, because it will amount to killing the content, because content is something which is alive. And if you simply kill it, then you are losing everything. because you may have an emptiness, but you will have a dead emptiness. So nothing further will happen. It is like killing oneself. So that is what will happen if you wipe out all the psychological memory by any means, through technology or through any external means, then you are just killing yourself. You are just incapacitating yourself. So that is not the way. It's not so much of erasing the content, but the content living its lifespan and coming to its natural end, right? Now that kind of ending will not generate a dead emptiness, but it will be an emptiness full of energy. And it is a living kind of emptiness. It will have a living quality. And that only in that kind of emptiness, a different thing can happen, not in the dead emptiness. So I think that erasing of the content is not the correct approach. You can't erase the content. You are not supposed to erase it, but you are supposed to observe it and let it come to its natural end.
Here,
Yeah.
fear, if I watch the fear
Yeah.
or anger or some emotion,
Yeah.
certainly it has some duration of life for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Whereas when it comes to the image or belief or something, idea,
Yeah.
do you think same thing applies, sir? It has some duration of life?
Yeah, if you have a belief or idea, right, so you have to observe, you have to question why do you have that belief? Because that belief may not just go by itself. It can go only through understanding, right? So you have to ask yourself why you are holding on to that belief. And then through questioning, when you understand, right, then out of that understanding, the belief will get dropped. So belief is actually an idea. So it is not belief coming to an end. It is the belief getting dropped because you don't find it necessary, because you understand that belief is only a belief and doesn't correspond to fact, and therefore it gets dropped. So there the mechanism is different. It is not belief coming to an end, because you may wait but belief will not come to an end. The belief is not to be ended, but it has to be dropped, and it will get dropped when you understand its nature, cause, and why you are holding that belief, what is behind it. So if there are psychological factors behind that belief, right, then you have to understand those psychological factors, and those psychological factors, they have to come to their natural end. And if they come to their natural end, then the belief will automatically get dropped. You don't have to do anything to drop it. So the psychological content is a living content. The dead information is not a living content. The conclusions, the pieces of information, the knowledge, the factual, the technological, that is not a living content in that sense. It is just an information, and it can be held by any machine. But the psychological content is the living content.
And it ends only to that moment only, moment to moment only.
No,
So
psychological content
suppose I
ends.
have a belief. Yes, sir.
No, yeah, if you have a belief, right, then if you don't end the psychological content responsible for that belief, right, and then you simply wipe out that belief, then you are likely to get caught up in another belief, because the psychological mechanism behind the belief is still intact, and therefore you may wipe out one belief, but you are going to end up in another belief, and that will go on until you are able to understand that psychological mechanism and bring it to its complete end, or let it end naturally, then you are free from any kind of belief.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, kindly give a common example of how understanding public observation acts on its own, and the thinker need not ponder about what will happen out of such understanding or awareness.
Yeah. So understanding happening as a direct perception, right? So it will lead to the corresponding action. So there is actually no gap. The understanding includes the corresponding action. Now, to give you an example, say you are walking on the top of a mountain or a mountain top, and when you walk, you almost reach the end of the top. Right. When you reach the end of the top, what you do? You have to just turn back and walk back. You can't walk further, which means that you understand that the mountain top you have reached the end of that top, and it is not possible to go further, and therefore you stop walking further and you turn back and start walking back. Now in that understanding, right, you never stop at the end and then ask yourself, what am I to do? How can I walk further? Or what if I walk further, then what will happen? Or how to go further? So no such questions are asked. You have seen the situation, you have understood the situation, and there is immediately a corresponding action, and the matter ends there. So the action of understanding happens like that. You don't have to think so much. You don't have to find out what you have to do and what you should do and so on. So if you see something as wrong, then it is dropped. You don't say that, yes, this is wrong, and yet you keep on asking how to drop it. So if you ask how to drop it, that means you have not seen it wrong. You have only concluded that it is wrong. It is only the thought which says that it is wrong. But the wrongness of that is not tested, not directly tested, not directly perceived, but it is a inferred wrongness, and therefore it may not get dropped. But if you see something as wrong, actually see, actually feel, then there is no possibility of it still continuing. It will immediately get dropped. It is just like some rubbish falling on you, right? The moment you see it as a rubbish, there is immediately a corresponding cleaning action. But if you don't see it as a rubbish, then you will continue with it. It will remain there with you, stuck to your body. So it is a matter of perception, matter of understanding. So when you understand, the corresponding action happens. You don't have to actually do it.
At what point does common sense come in the way of inquiry or observation?
I think common sense doesn't come in the way of inquiry or observation, right? It is the capacity to understand something actually we may say non-verbally. Capacity to understand something non-verbally. So the common sense, the function of common sense is to see to it that things are not just going into you without checking, without ascertaining their factualness or their this thing. But if common sense itself is prejudiced, then it is no longer common sense, because then it is the prejudice which is deciding what will be accepted and what will not be accepted, and then it is not a common sense. So actually common sense is not according to the conditioning. Common sense is, of course, the common sense may use knowledge to ascertain the factualness of certain things, right? But then it is not totally based on knowledge. There is also a non-verbal understanding there, because certain things, although you are unable to explain, but still they don't appeal to your common sense. You keep on feeling that there is something wrong, although you are not able to pinpoint what exactly is wrong. Right? But later on, when you are able to analyze and explore further, then you discover what that something wrong was. And then you say that, yes, your common sense was right. So, but what can happen is that the thinker can claim this common sense and then say that, then assume that whatever it doesn't go with him or his understanding, that is not acceptable, or that is not. And his understanding will be according to his own conditioning. So if the thinker is taking the role of a common sense, then it is no longer a common sense. Then it is something different. So actually you will see that whatever the thinker lays his hands upon, he makes a mess out of it. And so if the thinker lays its hands on common sense, then he makes it uncommon. It is no longer common sense, it is something else. So that is the nature of the thinker.
Sir, the next question is connected with the example of bedridden principle.
Yeah.
Why does thinker seek attention so badly?
No, because only through that attention it feels alive, it feels strong, it feels that it is there. And if it doesn't receive any attention, then it doesn't feel that much alive. There is no excitement and there is no importance, because this sense of being important is the very much you can say a necessary requirement for the self. The self has to feel that it is important, it has to be proud of something, and so on. And then that sense of importance it receives through the way people interact with him, the way other people interact with him. So in that interaction, when he can feel important, because if people look down upon him, they hate him, they don't like him, then the ego doesn't feel that important. Or sometimes he may take pleasure in that also. That is, people hating him, and in that hate also the thinker can take pleasure and will say that, well, at least through hate the people are paying attention to him. That means he is important still. So it has its own logic, illogic, whatever it is, and anything it can just convert into furthering its own importance. That is its nature.
Kishorji, I have a follow-up question here.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
please ask.
if I'm one is standing outside the stream and observing all the thoughts and everything that's going on out there, in terms of the response or the action that needs to be done, sometimes, let's say, if I'm thinking of trying to help someone, is it happening? How would I know that it's happening from a place of common sense or from a place of a thinker?
No, there is no thinker. If you have stepped out of the stream, then there is no thinker. It is finished. So whatever you are seeing it directly, not through the filters of a thinker, because it is not the thinker who is seeing it. The observation is happening directly. And so there is no question of illusion there.
But that's not a permanent state, is it? I mean, in the sense that there will always be an involvement with the stream in some form.
No. See,
Okay.
it doesn't happen that you step out of the stream, remain outside the stream for some time and again fall back into the stream. No, it is not like that. If it happens like that, then actually you have not stepped out of the stream at all. It's only the thinker which is imagining that it has stepped out of the stream. And it may remain in that assumption for some time until it finds that it is back to the stream. And when it finds itself back into the stream, it realizes that it was not outside the stream at all. It was just imagining. So it's not that you step out of the stream, remain outside for some time, and then again come back to the stream. Actually, the interesting thing is that the stream is not outside you, the stream is within you. It is not outside. The only thing is that you are not part of that stream. Although that stream is within you, you are not part of that stream.
Sir, if that's the case,
Yeah.
then how does one take decisions?
Who is going to take decision? There is no decision taking.
No, life is requiring a decision.
No. That decision there is no decision taking in that sense, because there is a perception, and corresponding to that perception, there is action. And that action may require the use of knowledge, the use of thought. And so, to that extent, the knowledge and thought will be used, and action will happen. And then after that, again, it is silence. That means the knowledge and thought in their proper place and don't pick up or thrive on that action. So it is not the thought that is taking a decision and acting according to that decision. Thought is not taking decision. Thought is only being used to carry out the action. Usually the action at the physical level, it does need thought and knowledge to take place. But what action is to take place, that is not decided by thought. That is coming through that perception. And perception doesn't need logic and thought and all the intellectual apparatus to perceive. Perception is directly seeing. And when something is seen directly, there is a direct understanding and the corresponding action.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Namaste,
Sir,
Kishorji.
Yeah, please ask. Yeah.
Kishorji, now what you were talking of stepping outside of the stream,
Yeah.
does the Hindu concept of atma-samarpana, can we draw a parallel, or are they two different things? Sir, could you kindly elaborate?
No, in atma-samarpana, what we are saying is we are leaving everything to the Almighty, or or to the Guru, or whosoever we consider as the Supreme. So we completely surrender ourselves to that. But in that surrender, as long as there is a sense that I am surrendering, then it is not actually surrender, because it is still the ego which is surrendering. And in that surrender also, the ego is only feeling proud, in the sense that it will say that yes, I have nothing to worry, I have surrendered everything to the Almighty. So the Almighty is going to take care of me. And therefore, he is feeling proud of that. So then he will compare himself with others, and he will say, oh, those other fools, I am superior to them because the Almighty is looking after me. I have surrendered to him. So in that way, it is still growing up. It is still getting puffed up with the feeling of importance, with the feeling of pride. So it is not a true surrender at all. So there is an interesting story of a Christian priest. Krishnaji was always happy to tell the stories of Christian priests. He sometimes used to mention. So a priest, he is said that he was completely surrendered to God and so on. And then there is a flood coming to the village where he was staying. And the flood water, the flood level raising and all these things. So people came to the priest and said that, Father, we have to leave this village because it is going to get submerged in water and it's not safe to stay here. He said, no, no, don't worry. I am completely surrendered to God, to Almighty. So he will take care of me. You don't have to worry. So when the church got submerged, then the priest, he went on the terrace of that and then started, but then the water level was still rising. So people came in a boat and told him, so Father, now come into the boat and leave this place because this is also going to get submerged. The priest said, no, no, my God is going to save me. I am completely surrendered to him. And then the water, even the terrace went underwater and all those things. So he climbed the bell, church bell thing, and there he was waiting. Then by that time the water level has so much risen and there was such a furious flow of water. The people had to come in the helicopter and request him that please come and save yourself because even this is going to get submerged. But the priest said that, no, no, the Almighty will save me because I am completely surrendered to him. And then the inevitable happens. The flood level rises and the priest gets washed off and he dies, gets drowned. And when he reaches heaven, he is very furious. And he is complaining to God that I had totally surrendered myself to you. And you did not even save me. You let me drown. So what kind of Almighty you are, who doesn't care for his devotees? Then the God's reply was, I tried to save you 3 times, but you refused to be saved. So what can I do? So that is how the ego functions. It takes pride in everything. So probably he wanted something spectacular, something magical to happen. And then that will show that how he is the true devotee of God, right? So more than saving his life, he was concerned with his own importance. Because if he had been saved in some miraculous way, his standing in the eyes of others would have been raised and he would have been considered as the true devotee. And that is what he was expecting to happen, which didn't happen, so he became furious. So I think this surrender is not that easy, because if the ego could give up, then there is no need to surrender even, because the very absence of the ego will set the things in a right way. So there is no need to surrender. But if one is trying to surrender, then one has to really ask, what is the motive behind that surrender? Is it one of the activities of the ego? So Krishnaji doesn't accept this surrendering at all, because he will say, who is it that is surrendering? And what is the motive? Why he wants to surrender? Is it because he wants to be completely secured? Or is it that he wants to appear as important to others? Or is it that he is merely escaping the kind of actions he is supposed to do? So by just surrendering, he can just escape from doing anything, and he is saying that, okay, the God will take care. So it is a kind of running away from one's responsibilities.
May I come in, sir?
Yeah.
Sir, it is easy to understand that thinker created the thinking, but it is very difficult to understand that thinking created the thinker. Can you kindly help me, sir?
See, that is that statement which we examined yesterday. The statement by Descartes, which says that I think, therefore I am. So which means that the thinking is creating the thinker, right? But then you may ask, you may say that even the machines think, but that thinking is not creating the thinker. Then why only in human beings the thinking is creating the thinker? So that is again connected with that sense of being alive. Because human beings are living entities, and they have what is called as the consciousness, the psychological content, and so on. And therefore, the thinking activity is not purely a mechanical thinking activity of a human being. If it is completely mechanical, then through that thinking, no thinker will be formed. So it will be just a response of memory, and therefore no thinker. But it is not always so. So the thinking activity has a lot of psychological content, and therefore it produces the thinker, which considers himself as living. So if they are just the pure thought, means just the pieces of information, then that those pieces of information may not lead to the thinker, because they are just pieces of information, and those pieces of information, they respond to a given input, so which is just like a machine, right? But our memory is not purely like the memory of a machine, because in that memory there is a lot of psychological content, and also there is this question of consciousness, being conscious.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
See, the type of understanding which is required in getting our attention, awareness, and so many other words in this particular subject is tremendous. What we are trying to approach this particular subject or all these subjects is with limited understanding of limited understanding of this particular real meaning. Whereas the attention or the normicity of any such word like attention, awareness is tremendous. So with this limited understanding or limited meaning or limited having that particular, we will not be able to understand the basic subject. For example, this what do you call this consciousness? That is what I want to say.
Yes, that is the whole point. are we trying to explore this theme on the basis of what we already know or what we have already read from other sources, or we are exploring this on the basis of our day-to-day life context? So knowledge is limited, no doubt, but the capacity to understand may not be limited. And if you are trying to understand only in terms of knowledge, then what you say is right, that we are trying to understand on the basis of limited knowledge. And therefore, the understanding that comes out of this limited knowledge will also be a limited understanding. And Krishnaji won't call it as understanding at all, or it may at the most say that it is intellectual understanding. Right? So, are we trying to understand something in terms of the knowledge, or are we trying to understand something by directly observing it? Right? Not beginning with the knowledge. That means Krishnaji calls it as the putting aside all the knowledge and looking at something afresh. Because if we don't put aside the knowledge, then that knowledge is going to limit our attempt to understand. And then out of that, only in a limited way we will be able to understand. So the best thing is to put aside all knowledge. And so he says that begin with saying that I don't know. Now, I don't know is not just a saying. I don't know, when you say I don't know, it means that you have already put aside all that you know. And only after putting aside all that you know, you can say that you don't know. And I don't know is actually a state of not knowing, which means that whatever you are perceiving is not interpreted in terms of knowledge, but you are trying to grasp it directly. So only in such a state of not knowing, then the understanding is not limited. Then you can understand things in a different way. But if we are only trying to understand on the basis of knowledge, right, and which is mostly the case, because whatever we hear is immediately being interpreted in terms of what we already know. And then on that basis, we also draw the conclusion. And those conclusions then we accept as the new understanding. But it is not understanding at all. It is just the intellectual activity of the thinker, who is simply receiving whatever is being said and then drawing conclusions out of that based on its knowledge or understanding based on knowledge, and then taking those conclusions as what he has understood, and then applying those conclusions to whatever other situations he is trying to understand. So that is the intellectual activity that goes on. Now, are we trying, in these explorations, are we doing the same thing? If we are doing the same thing, then the same thing will happen, which means that no understanding, a very limited understanding. But if we are not doing that, that means we are in a position to say that I don't know, and then look at the things afresh. Right? Then there is a possibility of understanding something in a true scale, not in a limited way. So I think it is up to each one of us how we are approaching this whole thing.
Yeah. Namaste, Kishorji. Can I ask?
Namaste, Pavanji. Yeah, ask. Yeah.
Sir, I don't see that individual consciousness is an illusion, survival instinct make me accept the statement, prevents me to see that. Is it right to ask you, could you kindly show that to me actually?
But are we in a position to see directly, see actually? I mean, we can only appeal to your logic, we can only appeal to a way from which you can at least infer that yes, it looks logically so, right? But directly perceiving it is a completely different phenomenon. It is altogether a different faculty of the brain, if we can call it as a faculty. And if we have not used our brain in that way, right, then how can anyone show me directly whatever he is talking about? But if it were possible like that, Krishnaji would have shown to everybody directly, and then everybody would have understood directly. But that is not so, because we have been using only the analytical or the intellectual capability of the brain which understands through the process of analysis, through process of intellectualization, through concepts, ideas and theories. So that is the way the brain functions. But we have not tried even once to observe something directly without the intellectual process interfering. So that is the whole difficulty. And then suddenly we want somebody to show us directly what he is talking about. So it is simply not possible, because a person may not be in a position to see directly, because he has never worked in that direction. He has never even tried to look in that way. So that is why we are all the time saying that, yes, can you look at something without the interference of thought, without the memory or without labeling and so on. So it's a matter of actually doing it. So which means that when this meeting is over or when we are back to our day-to-day this thing, then have we actually tried to look at something without the interference of thought? Or when we actually try to look what happens, how the thought interferes and so on. So these are all the practical things which have to be done. And without doing that, we may not be in a position even to ask such a question. So many times Krishnaji also used to be told that, sir, you are not giving everything, you are giving only bits and pieces, but most of the thing you are not giving us at all. So he used to say that I am giving you all, I am not keeping anything with me. But are you capable of taking it? And that is where the difficulty is. So to expect someone to show us directly is probably a kind of escape from the work which one is supposed to do. Because if one is really working at it, then probably there may not be such question arising, because through that work one will be able to come upon it.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So I think time is also up, and we can stop now, and we'll meet in the evening again at 5:30. So if you come up with some questions by that time, then you can keep them ready and ask them in the evening session. Yeah. Or if you have some suggestions as to what should be discussed, or what more we need to discuss about certain topics or issues, then you can bring up that also, and we'll take it up in the evening meeting. So we stop now for
Yes,
this meeting. Yeah.
Namaste.
Yeah. Namaste.